denizens of the night. Welcome to another episode of the macabre, the terrifying. Broadcasting live from a particularly large pile of raked leaves, I will be your guide through the witching hours. Tonight, we'll make another visit to the sleepy little town where evil stirs, Brighton. Our tale for this evening will stir up some strong autumn feelings in many listeners. You'll get the whole package. Town fairs with carnival lights and tents, raking leaves into big piles, a cool wind that slips through the trees during a twilight that comes earlier and earlier. Oh, it almost escaped me. But who could forget the cover-up of a horrific crime in a small town? Who could forget urban legends that turn out to be real? And who could forget that delicious fall feeling when the skeletons in your closet come out to play? This story is called A Wind Through the Leaves and was written by A.G. Hilton.
A crisp breeze fluttered the few dry leaves which still clung to their skeletal branches as a car made its way along the border roads of Brighton, North Carolina. Above, the sky turned toward that burnt orange which graced many an autumn sunset. And though the evening outside was cool and mild, the air within the car was charged. "I still can't believe you. I raised you better than this." Tyson kept his eyes fixed ahead. Whether he felt it was deserved or not didn't matter anymore. He was going to lose it if he had to listen to the disappointment harangue return for another encore performance. "I mean, your grandpa would have tanned my hide if I'd been that reckless. I wouldn't have been able to sit down for a week if I'd acted the fool like you did." Tyson couldn't keep his mouth shut anymore. "We were just messing around. I didn't even do anything. I was just there." "I'm not sure if that's better or worse," Dad replied. "Why were you there? Figured I'd raised a son who knew to keep better company." Tyson bit off the acidic remarks that wanted to well up. On some level, perhaps he was mad because his dad was right, because the whole thing had been stupid, a joke that went sideways. It had been Chris's idea to move Mr. Whitaker's ladder while the maintenance man checked a condensing unit on one of the Brighton High School buildings. That in itself seemed harmless, if a little mean-spirited. But then Mike had noticed that the old guy had left his keys in the ignition of the battered pickup he used as a work vehicle. The ensuing joyride — he had not been the one behind the wheel, he reminded himself — would have been more than enough to put them in hot water. But the cherry on top was Mr. Whitaker coming after them in a fluster and not realizing his ladder had been moved. Tyson hadn't taken a close look, but he remembered the old man moaning after toppling to the ground. Chris had said there was bone sticking out of one arm. Tyson had to admit that it made him sick. Hearing the old guy groaning had pulled him out of whatever pack mentality that had led to his being there and playing along. But a less mature part of him couldn't help but feel that he didn't deserve the blame. If only the old guy had taken 2 seconds to look, maybe everyone could have laughed it off. As things stood, he was suspended from school and there was talk of making other academic punishments. Tyson and company were seniors after all, and due for graduation the coming May. That is, if they could walk the straight and narrow until then. To top it off, his folks had taken his phone like he was some kid, and the bit of money Dad said he would contribute to Tyson's long-held savings fund toward a car of his own was in danger of being revoked. Tonight, it had taken all the cajoling Tyson could manage to get Dad to let him attend the town's annual fall fair for a chance to get out and socialize a bit. Of course, Dad had declined him taking the car, as he normally would. Said he'd have to prove he was responsible again before he would let him. So, here he was, being driven around like a little kid. As if on cue, they rounded a turn, and Tyson could make out the fairgrounds. The fair always set up in an area around the old dirt stock car track on the edge of town. Dark was still a ways off, but already a few of the rides on the midway had their lights running. Soon, they'd be close enough to smell the intoxicating mix of buttered popcorn and fried foods, which he always thought of in the autumn. "You can just let me off by the entrance up here," Tyson said. But the car passed on by the fairgrounds without slowing. "Slight change of plans," Dad said. "I'll drop you off after you do a little community service." "Community service?" "I was talking to the sheriff this morning, and he said most of the leaves have fallen from that big tree in Mr. Shaw's yard. I volunteered you to help the old man rake them up. You do that, and then you can go to the fair." "By the time I finish, it'll be dark," Tyson said, failing to keep a touch of petulance out of the protest. "Besides, Mr. Shaw is such an old, crotchety bastard." "He's an old man who needs some help. You can put up with some crankiness for the evening, and I better not hear that you were complaining. Besides, Mr. Shaw was also sheriff here a long ways back. Maybe he'll be able to dissuade you from being so reckless in the future." Before long, they were trundling up the driveway to Mr. Shaw's place. The home stood on the edge of town, set alone along the side of the road, and overshadowed by one massive tree in the backyard. Tyson had no clue what kind of tree it was, but one thing was certain: a tree like that has a lot of leaves to fall. As the car came to stop on the gravel drive, a broad-shouldered man came out the front door to meet them. He wore scrubs, indicating he was some sort of visiting or stay-in nurse. The man threw up a hand to them as they got out. "Evening. Heard Mr. Shaw say someone was coming over for the leaves." "Here's your man," Dad said, pointing to Tyson. "Just point him where to go and he'll get started. Come on around the back, then." As the three of them walked around back, Tyson surveyed the work. The backyard was covered in leaves. It looked like someone had tried to get started on the project. There were some raked piles here and there, and some trash bags filled with even more leaves sat off to one side. But even with these signs that someone had been hard at it before, still not a single blade of grass could be seen through the thick coating of leaves that remained. "I'm Barney, by the way," said the broad man. "Been on rotation to check in on Mr. Shaw lately. I was trying to get some of these up last week. Mr. Shaw is real particular about getting them up and how they get put away. But we had that bad storm come through, and now you can't tell I've done anything." A rasping bellow interrupted. "Barney! What the hell's taking so long?" Barney smiled tiredly and shook his head. "Let's meet the host real quick, and then I'll get out of your hair." Mr. Shaw glowered down at them from the back porch. He sat in a wheelchair with a blanket draped over his lap and an old work jacket draped over his shoulders. Age had made him narrow and thin, though how much age bore him down was unknown. Tyson thought the man could have been anywhere from 90 to 180 based on how papery his skin looked and how furrowed were his deep wrinkles. He grinned with yellowing teeth, and Tyson thought the sparkle in his eye looked like that of a schoolyard bully. "Chop, chop," Mr. Shaw said in that grating voice.
I ain't got all damn night. I need this yard cleared now. Told big man over here he needed to get on it, but here we are wasting the daylight.
Don't you worry, Mr. Shaw, Dad said. I got your help right here. He'll get this yard cleared for you. Mr. Shaw turned a rheumy eye on Tyson and spat onto the ground beneath the porch.
So here's the troublemaker, huh?
Tyson shifted uncomfortably under that gaze until Dad stepped up beside him and offered him his phone. Here, to call me when it's done. I know he's a hard case, but you're going to be respectful and get the job done, right? Tyson took the phone and mumbled a confirmation. The old man still stared at him fixedly, and something in that gaze made him squirm. Barney pointed to the edge of the porch. Pulled out that rake for you. I got a new pair of gloves, too. Might help the hands a bit. He turned to Mr. Shaw. It's about time for me to head out to check on Mrs. Daniels. You want me to push you inside before I go? Mr. Shaw waved a dismissal.
Think I'll stay and watch the show.
Again, Barney gave that tired smile, this time to Tyson. Don't worry, he's this way to everyone these days. Don't let him bully you too much, he said quietly. Then, turning back to the porch, All right then, I'm gonna head out. Be back after dark, Mr. Shaw. Then Dad and Barney departed, leaving Tyson alone under the gaze of the decrepit Mr. Shaw.
Come on, boy. Get over here and take this rake. These leaves must be up before sundown. And I want them all bagged up, too, you hear?
Tyson didn't respond, but approached the porch to take the rake, leaning against it. But as he reached out, Mr. Shaw stuck out a foot and wedged it against the rake handle, holding it in place against the porch.
Let me get a look at the troublemaker. Seen lots of 'em in my day. Sheriff Brighton told me about your little joyride at the school.
It was just a stupid accident, Tyson said.
Look, he's spineless, too. Can't even take credit.
The old man hawked and spat another globule down as Tyson flinched away.
I think they're being easy on you. Back in my time, I would have put the fear of God in you.
Look, I'm just here to help.
Maybe you're the one needing the help. 'Cause that's how it starts, see? A little fooling around, a little disregard, and then in 10 years you ain't nothing but another good-for-nothing body walking around in the world.
You don't know me, so stop talking like it. Tyson regretted the words as soon as they left his mouth. All he needed was to go mouthing off to this old-timer and have him complain about it. Just need to keep quiet and get the job done. But those schoolyard bully eyes sparkled amid their rheum.
Well, now, maybe you ain't quite without a spine after all.
The old man lifted his foot and kicked the rake down.
There you go. Get to it.
Tyson grabbed the rake and stepped away from the porch, trying not to look like he was fleeing. The old man looked frail enough that a strong wind might carry him away, but nevertheless, he carried a threatening air about him. Something in his gaze made Tyson feel not like someone bound for college, but a little kid at the mercy of a cruel parent. Maybe some people are just rotten, he mused. He remembered back when Mr. Shaw was still spry enough to be up and about in town. Even being a kid back then, Tyson knew the old guy had something of a reputation as a hard-ass. In small towns like Brighton, certain figures established an almost archetypal footing in the minds of the people. Mr. Shaw was nothing if not the perfect picture of the horrible old man. In fact, he recalled a vague memory of the once much more mobile Mr. Shaw giving a tongue lashing to the meek Mrs. Daniels outside the supermarket over some unknown slight. Yet, despite being universally disliked, no one seemed to stand up to the man. Maybe it was some primitive-brained response beaten into the townspeople over time. As if, since Mr. Shaw had once been sheriff, everyone still saw him as some kind of authority. In fact, Tyson remembered hearing that Mr. Shaw's father had been sheriff before him, and that Sheriff Braddon, too, was some relation, maybe a cousin or nephew. Thinking on it, the whole of the power structures in town felt incestuous and enclosed, a special class of elite like some old nobility. Nobility that could use a good peasant's revolt, he thought.
Quit daydreaming out there and rake, damn it!
Came that croaking voice. Tyson shot an acidic gaze to the porch, but he got to it. The time raking passed slow, yet the sun seemed to race towards setting. Yet despite first appearing an insurmountable task, Tyson had made great headway. By now, most of the yard was cleared. As he'd gone along, Mr. Shaw had given instruction to stop periodically and bag up the raked leaves. At least 13 large trash bags now sat in a row against the house, each one swollen and rasping with the sound of dried leaves when touched. Sweat stood on his brow, but a chilly October breeze kept him from getting too winded. Occasionally, he almost felt he could get a whiff of the foods from the fairgrounds on that breeze, and it seemed the scent wasn't in his imagination.
Smell that, boy?
Mr. Shaw said after a time.
Big night for all you young people with the fall festival. Reckon that's where you'd like to be, huh? Maybe missing out on it will keep you out of trouble.
Tyson didn't see the old man kick out, but one of the bags nearest him beside the porch toppled over and spilled some of its contents.
Clean up on aisle 12,
the old man cackled.
Better pick it up before they blow all over in this breeze.
Tyson sighed and marched back toward the house. He secured the bag and stared hard at the old man, this time not looking away from those old eyes. He may be here for a punishment, but that didn't mean he had to let this jerk talk to him like that. Besides, hadn't Dad told him to stand up to bullies? Do you get off on this or something? Being a complete asshole for no reason? I mean, I'm trying to help you here. The old eyes flared with a spark of rage, but it was only for a moment. Then, a feline-like cool detachment took its place.
Big talker now, huh? I tell you, boy, if I weren't in this wheelchair, I'd clean your clock for talking to me that way.
Then I'd say it's you who's the big talker, seeing as how you can't do anything about it.
Little prick,
he growled. His face remained placid, but his hands clenched at the armrests of the wheelchair.
You ain't got no idea who you're talking to. You and the rest of the sheep in this town.
Tyson turned away and retrieved the rake.
Oh, yeah? Enlighten me.
Mr. Shaw laughed bitterly, a sound not unlike the scraping of the dry leaves.
You know, boy, autumn is a season liable to make a body sentimental. Make you think about what's gone and what's coming down the road. And it's a time for stories, I reckon. Unpleasant stories, too. Halloween's right around the corner, after all.
Your point?
How's about I let you in on a real-life scary story? How's about I try to paint you a picture of right where you rank in the pathetic pecking order of this here little town? Well, why am I asking? Got a captive audience, after all.
Tyson turned away and kept raking, while the old man cackled on. But he couldn't have anticipated the man's next words, and they made him freeze.
Ever wonder what it's like to kill someone, boy?
Excuse me?
I said, you ever wonder what it's like to kill someone? What it's like to hold that power over someone else, to snuff them out?
Are you sick or just crazy?
I am what I am, boy. And you are what you are. One a wolf, the other sheep. How about that skinny daddy of yours? What kind of man is he? Reckon from the look of him, he's another limp-wristed pussy. Figures he'd raise a little hellion in the making.
Tyson turned back to the old man with a glare and hefted the rake.
That's the spirit, boy. Bet you'd like to brain me with that. But you won't.
Tyson's hands clenched on the rake's handle, but he tried his best to look impassive. He'd been on the receiving end of all form of harassment in school, but never had he met someone so forward and active in their dislike of others, to the point of amusing themselves in it. It was an almost gleeful type of misanthropy. Instead of giving in and barking back another response, instead of confirming that, yes, in that moment, he wouldn't mind taking a swipe at that old head with the rake, he just focused on finishing up.
See, my old man was a hard one,
Mr. Shaw continued.
He's the one who taught me about killing. See, he knew the way of things. He knew there was a natural order. Some folk just don't matter. World we live in is too soft. It lets weak folk get ahead and holds strong folk back. That's why he done what he done all them years ago.
The old man paused, as if looking for some response, but Tyson gave none. He only finished raking another pile and began stuffing the leaves into one of the black trash bags. The breeze, which had been a low but steady susurrant whisper, stirred itself into a brief gust, scattering a few leaves as he reached for them. Still, he collected them in silence. He'd decided the old bastard might be crazy as much as mean. From here on, he was just going to finish his part and get out of here. If the old guy was looking for an appreciative audience, he wouldn't get one from him.
This place ain't normal, boy. You know that? Of course not. Sheep are followers. If the shepherd leads you to the wolf's den, you'd follow and be none the wiser. That's what this place really is. A wolf's lair. Except the wolf's been out. Been out for a long time. But soon, that'll change.
Another moment of silence passed. On the horizon, the burning orange glow kissed the top of the tree and then began to descend in earnest. Mr. Shaw continued with a grin.
Seems I got a little ahead of myself, boy. You'll have to forgive me that. This old head gets cobwebs sometimes. But I still got that ghost story for you. What'd you do if I told you that's haunted ground you're walking on right now?
Tyson paused midway through stuffing a bag with leaves. The proclamation wasn't worth a pause. It was the kind of thing accompanied by an orchestral sting in a cheap horror movie. Yet something, perhaps the waning light, perhaps that chill of autumn air conjuring childhood Halloween frights, lent the statement a gravity which it ought not to have had. Mr. Shaw leered at him from the porch.
See, this whole town is haunted in its way. But don't you worry your head over that. For now, just you worry about this little patch here. Of course, I suppose to understand this, you gotta understand the wraith.
That sent an involuntary shiver up Tyson's spine. It suddenly felt like his brainstem itself had been dipped into freezing water. Unbidden, a childhood story of something which stalked from the shadows came to his mind. Something, the kids of Brighton said, which came to snatch you up when you're alone. Something which they said wants to hollow you, though what this meant was never part of the telling. "That's kid stuff," he replied, automatically and forcefully. He spoke on, almost mindlessly, the words soothing that sudden spike of irrational anxiety. "You'll have to do better than kid stuff everyone's heard a million times. Urban legend is all it is. I heard that was something they started telling the kids to keep them from going off alone after that thing with that kitty-diddling mortician back in the day. People just never got over that kid he took and disappeared with. That's all there is to it." "See there? The young ones in Brighton always know the Wraith. Not as though anyone ever sits you down and tells you the full story, but y'all always pick it up. Schoolyard talk. Something a friend whispered from another friend. But in a few more years, you'd forget it just as quick. Funny thing, lad. Reckon if your limp-wristed father were here, we'd ask him about those stories, and he'd say he ain't got a clue what we're talking about. He'd be telling the truth, best I can figure, too. But you ain't on that side of things yet, boy. Hell, from that side of things..." Mr. Shaw chuckled. It turned into a wet cough. "Well, from that side of it, maybe you'd be laughing at me and my talk, instead of looking at me like that. Like a rat caught out in the open when the lights come up." The old man's words called to something inside Tyson. This sudden churning of anxiety in his gut, the darting of his eyes to the darkening tree line. All of these reactions bloomed up from something deep within him, and yet still he felt they were not entirely of his own making. It was as if something coded into his DNA or branded into his soul was being called to. A doom inscribed into his very essence through nothing more than an accident of birth. A sense of having been born into a secret show which, for a moment, showed him a peek behind the curtain. And what lay beyond such a curtain could be only madness. But then he got control of the runaway thoughts. This whole thing was crazy. This old man had clearly lost it. Best to bag these last few leaves and call for his ride. Hell, maybe he'd just start walking back that way. Again, despite looking like the breeze could carry him away, Tyson couldn't help but sense a vague air of menace about the small frame in the wheelchair. Only then did the feeling gain some clarity. It was a barely suppressed air of violence. "There it is," wheezed Mr. Shaw. "I know fear when I see it. And to me, fear ain't nothing but a short way of saying respect. And you'd better respect me, boy. Days are coming when I'll up out of this chair again. And they won't be far off now. I can feel it. Can you feel it, boy? Can you smell it in the air? There's change bearing down on this little town like a freight train. My old man thought it would be in his time. Well, he may have started the pact, but his piece is mine now, and he's just another rotting corpse in the ground. You get in on something like this, you gotta be all in. From all I've seen, there's only one way out, short of things coming to fruition." "Will you just shut up?" Silence fell. The words had exploded from Tyson's lips. He told himself it was an outburst of annoyance and not one of fear. The old man had prattled his talk for the entire duration, and Tyson just couldn't take any more. yet he ignored a deeper subconscious warning that some things were not meant to be known. Mr. Shaw steepled his fingers. Too late for that, I'm afraid. After all you know now, it's out of my hands. You're in it now, boy. I don't know anything. I don't know what you're talking about, and I don't care. You're fucking crazy. You know! The voice which came out of the old man seemed suddenly too large for the small frame. All you fucking sheep know deep down, but you won't admit it. Look into my eye, boy. Here's a preamble to your little story. It'll put things nice and neat for you. Fact is, this little shit stain of a town ain't nothing but a cattle pen. There's something old in this land, and it's coming back to take what it's owed. But not me. No, sir. I'm chosen. I'm protected. That's why I can say whatever I damn please to you. My old man took an oath, and since then, we've controlled this place, making it ready for when the time comes. And I done my part. That business with the mortician Arthur Knight happened right under my nose back in the day. Always knew the children would be the key, but that kid wasn't supposed to go poking his nose around things like he done. If he'd stayed away, well, he'd still be in one piece, maybe. He forced our hand, jump-started the flow of things. Took some doing, but I got it all smoothed over. That's one of them things only the young folks seem to get right. Ask an old-timer about the whole thing, and some of 'em will tell you Arthur Knight was caught or killed when it was all said and done. Hell, some of 'em will even settle for the idea he ran for it and vanished. But it weren't nothing like that. He ain't never gone away. We hid him. I ran the redirection game until it was just another old news story. Until Arthur had time to become. Tyson stood there with the last of the leaves in a bag, but he stopped short of tying it closed. What had begun as a story of monsters had just taken a new turn, one more grounded, and which his mind latched onto like driftwood in a froth. You covered it up? The Brighton police, the kids that have gone missing since. What about them? Mr. Shaw gripped the armrests of the wheelchair with bony fingers and leaned forward to smile that yellow-toothed smile. What about them? I think you can guess. I told you, the children are the key. He's been collecting them ever since. Ever since? Tyson's brain whirled. Are you saying you protected him while he kept abducting kids? I'm telling you that once it started on that summer afternoon, it ain't stopped. I'm telling you Arthur Knight never did leave this town. I'm telling you that he's still here. Again, a million tidbits of childhood stories bubbled up, and right against them, these new facts. And unbidden, the two began to blur together to suggest something both horrible and absurd, but which felt inexplicably and horribly right. That can't be right, Tyson responded in reflex. It can't be. He'd be too old. He'd probably be dead by now. Are you slow, boy? Or are you too afraid to acknowledge it? The Wraith ain't no story, and Arthur Knight ain't a man no more. He's the one to open the way when things are made right. A rapturous gleam now entered those old eyes.
He's the one who's gonna lift up the chosen.
The more the man talked, the more he called to that deep part of him, the part that heard the insanity and acknowledged its truth. A tremble entered his limbs. I'll tell, you know. I'll tell about the cover-up. I don't know about the rest, but I swear as soon as I'm out of here, I'm not keeping my mouth shut.
Go ahead, boy. I'm just a crazy old man, ain't I? Who's gonna believe the ravings of an old, half-out-of-his-mind bastard? Besides, I done told you I'm protected. And I don't mean by my little nephew playing sheriff. I defy God himself to strike me down. What I want, I get in the end. The work is almost complete.
Mr. Shaw smiled wickedly.
In fact, that leads us neatly along to an object lesson and that little ghost story I promised. You ain't the only one to be stood in that exact spot with that same stupid look on your face. Long while ago, back when that there tree was just a thin thing, I had me a lady. Now don't look so shocked, boy. I always knew how to please a woman. But this lady, she was special. I took my time with her. I wanted to bring her into the inner circle, lay things out, and bring her into the pact. So she came over on this very date all those years back, and we were set to go to the fall festival. But before we went out, we had us a little talk here in the yard. But god damn it, if she didn't stand there looking at me with that same idiot gawk you've got. She tried to run out on me right there. Said all the same shit you did. How she was going to tell about what we'd done to hide old Arthur Knight away.
Mr. Shaw leaned back and looked to the tree. He looked almost wistful, or as close to it as those eyes could manage.
We were set to have such a good time. I remember thinking maybe we'd share candied apples. Used to love those back when I could still bite into one.
Then the old look reasserted itself in his eyes.
But no such luck. See, it wouldn't do to have a loose end like that. Not back before I realized how protected I was. So, I took care of it. Know what I did, boy? Know what I did right where you stand? I grabbed her by that pretty throat and squeezed. I squeezed and she kicked and hit. Oh, she was a fighter, that one. But I held firm until she went limp and her eyes got unfocused and empty. Kind of like a fish's, now that I think on it.
Tyson's eyes darted from the old man to the ground beneath him and back.
You? I kept on squeezing until I knew she wouldn't be coming back. Know what I done then? I got my shovel and I buried the bitch right there beneath the tree, right underneath your feet. See how big and hardy it is? I like to think she nourished those roots. In fact, I think part of her's here. I like to think the master's power kept her from getting away after she was so willing to blow the whistle on us. Hear that, boy? When the wind blows, especially when the festival comes around, I think you can hear her moaning in the wind coming through the leaves.
You're a fucking monster, Tyson finally managed through trembling lips. His fear was giving way to a blinding rage. He didn't know what was true or false, what was reality and what was dementia-laden delusion. But the fact that this man had lived to such an old age and had left so much misery in his wake made his blood boil.
Oh, hush, you little shit. I ain't even told you the best part. After it was all done and I made a few calls to make sure things would be all quiet like, I still got to eat my candied apple. Reckon maybe it's best that I didn't have to share it.
With that, Mr. Shaw let loose a wicked cackle. He cackled on and on, like he just told the funniest joke in the world, until he had to dab at tears in his eyes. For a moment, Tyson stood stunned until the old man mastered himself again and barked,
"Now, boy, put that bag with the others and get the hell out of here."
Tyson considered the last bag of leaves and the shape on the porch, now only a silhouette against the lights from inside the house. He marched up to the porch, to where the rest of the bagged leaves stood lined, and looked up into that shadowed face. "Do it yourself," he said simply, and overturned the bag, shaking the contents onto the ground and throwing some up at the old man. Then he turned and began walking away. Mr. Shaw spluttered, the sound of someone unused to being talked back to, much less resisted in any way.
You get back here. Boy, you're in for a world of trouble unless you get back here and clean this up."
Tyson didn't look back. "They're just leaves. You're so big and bad. Get 'em yourself." A foul series of curses went up and were caught in a breeze that began to stir. Tyson paused then and glanced backwards. To his shock, Mr. Shaw was rising from the wheelchair. The movement was slow and deliberate, an exertion of extreme will over a body that ought not be able to support itself. But somehow he managed to rise and clamber down the porch after the fallen rake. Tyson suddenly sensed something manic in the movement, an unspoken desperation. And all the while, the breeze picked up until it was a gusting wind. The trees surrounding the property rattled, and what leaves remained on their branches whispered to each other dryly. Something in the air felt charged, almost anticipatory. Then he saw it. As Mr. Shaw reached for the rake, the growing wind caught up the fallen leaves and twirled them around in a miniature cyclone. They turned and twisted, and they took shape. Vaguely at first, but more defined with every rotation. A human figure formed amid the chaos. At once, the string of acrid curses stopped. By the dim light coming through the back windows, Tyson saw Mr. Shaw's roomy eyes bulge as he too saw the strange phenomenon. The old man stumbled back, slipping and managing just barely to catch himself on the porch railing.
You? But... Get out of here!
He cried into the air.
You can't! I'm protected!
The figure flung itself at Mr. Shaw, bearing him down with a loud popping onto the porch steps. Mr. Shaw shrieked, a sound even more witch-like than his horrible cackle, as the shape reached out with what were now very definitely formed arms and hands. He lashed out, but while the shape had force enough to knock him down, his now only passed uselessly through leaves suspended in air. He let out one final shriek, and then those hands seized him by the throat, and the shriek dissolved into a garbled and wet sound. Still he thrashed, still he swung, and still the insubstantial hands clenched at the loose skin around his throat. The whole thing might have happened in moments, maybe in seconds. From where he stood, Tyson felt detached from time. He wouldn't accept what he was seeing, couldn't accept what it implied. But it was all around him, that susurrant whispering. And yes, he could hear a voice in the whispering of the leaves. The voice became a shriek of its own as the wind beat down in a new gale upon the yard, bending the branches of the old tree and screaming through the surrounding woods. Then Mr. Shaw gurgled a final time. Urine started in a trickle down Tyson's leg, and he ran. He ran and ran on through that dark autumn night, ran down the country road, scattering deer and fleeing that unnatural wind. He ran until he stumbled within sight of a multicolored glow and the sound of screaming children on fair rides. Then he collapsed, panting, whispering assurances to himself, all the while smelling those carnival smells. And at last he found that he was laughing soundlessly into the earth. His mind had shielded itself, boiling all the night's madness away to a single, simple want. He could go for a candied apple.
Ho, ho, ho! A candied apple indeed. A sweet treat to follow a sweeter story. How delicious the fall vibes. How sumptuous the justice meted out on the wind. Say, are you curious about that mortician Arthur Knight? We hear that the sheriff in this story helped to cover up some awful incident with a boy who saw something he wasn't supposed to. I happen to know where you can get the inside scoop on that incident and spend a little more time in Brighton if you'd like. Nightside Tales, written by Mr. Hilton himself, has its setting in Brighton, and one of its central characters is the enigmatic Arthur Knight. If you're an audio fan, I performed the audiobook, so you'll no doubt enjoy it if you enjoyed this story. It's free on Kindle Unlimited as of this recording, and the audiobook is marked down for Audible members. I'll include a quick snippet at the end of one of my favorite sections that features Arthur Knight and the boy who didn't get away. Please leave a like on this video and subscribe to hear more stories like this one. Whatever you do, stay in the moment and enjoy your cider and candied apples. And have a listen to this spooky sample.
He didn't care if it was a bitch boy thing to do. He wanted to cry. He wanted Mama. He wanted Daddy. He heard sniffing like a large dog. Then Knight's voice. "What's this?" The sound of approaching steps made Brandon sick. He knew if he looked up now, he would face a twisted silhouette looming above him in the orange light. "Mother, I smell a guest." This wasn't right. This was meant for bad boys like Frankie McCloud. He wasn't a bad boy. He never wanted to be a bad boy. But that no longer mattered. As the ink-black shadow fell over him, Brandon realized that this was a different world from that one which promised good things to good little boys. This was a hungry world full of things which did not distinguish between boys who were good and bad. Because in the end, they all taste the same.
Don't fall asleep.